guys, welcome to CalicoRadio Knits. I'm Taryn. It is the beginning of 2025 and I have decided to make a temperature blanket. For those of you who aren't familiar with temperature blankets, they are essentially when over the course of an entire year you knit a row or a couple of rows with a color that corresponds with that day's daily temperature. But I have decided to take a little bit of a different approach and not use temperature at all. I have decided to use mileage. So I want to bring together two of my kind of favorite hobbies, which are knitting and running. I've had this idea for quite a while, but basically I want to measure the daily mileage that I run. I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to organize this video. I had the idea that I would record a video over the course of the entire year, but I might end up doing like kind of quarterly updates. So I kind of came up with this idea because I already track my daily mileage over the course of the year, so it's going to be very easy to collect that data and then convert it over to a mileage blanket rather than a temperature blanket. I've been tracking my mileage for the last 2 years, and this will be my 3rd year. So for the actual blanket, I don't plan to knit it. I plan to use Tunisian crochet, and I want to use the chevron tassels temperature blanket pattern by Tony from TL Yarn Crafts. I picked this pattern for a couple of reasons. The main one is that it uses fingering weight yarn, which is cost effective, and also I'm really happy if it doesn't create a huge blanket because temperature blankets tend to be kind of huge. It'll be nice to just make a throw. It's kind of a good entryway into temperature blanket making, and I like that it's Tunisian crochet as well because I think it'll be a nice break from all of my knitting and traditional crochet projects that I usually do over the course of the year. And the last thing is I picked this project honestly because I love what she does with the ends. Like she makes these cute tassels, and I think that that will be great not to have to weave in the ends because you are going to be cutting the yarn almost every day. I think it's kind of a genius way to handle all of those ends. So I'm very excited to use that pattern to make the temperature blanket. So to actually organize and plan my mileage blanket, I used a Millinote board, and I will show you guys that now. This is my mileage blanket board. So the first thing is how I want to break down the distance. Since I've started running, I have always tracked my distance in kilometers. I've been recently thinking about switching to miles because with running longer distances, I think it's nicer to have the bigger metric. Sometimes kilometers are a bit too small for the longer distances. And part of the reason I feel that way is because I honestly just don't want to be bothered with my watch buzzing all the time. Because kilometers are smaller, it notifies you more often that you've run another kilometer. And I just like the idea of things being more quiet and not thinking so much about pace and just going out and doing a run. And I've also heard if you're interested in increasing your daily mileage, daily distance, I guess, it's better to use miles because if you think, oh, I'll just run one more, a kilometer is much smaller than a mile. So if you run one more mile, that is a significant increase in your weekly totals or monthly or however you measure it. Also with this project, I thought it would be nice to use bigger distances because it makes the breakdowns a bit more tidy. So you can see for like the smaller distances, it's just 2 miles because those are likely going to be the distances I'm running more often. And then when we get to the bigger distances, the range is much wider, obviously, because I'm not going to be normally running 20 miles. And then the max is 26 miles because that's the marathon distance. So I thought anything over that, it's only going to happen a couple times over the course of the whole year. So anything over 26 miles is another bracket in itself. And then we have another color for rest day, one for cross training, and then I want to get like a little piece of gold thread for race day. So whatever distance that race is, I'll use the regular color in the key plus add a little bit of a gold thread. That's kind of my thought for that. And then I'm going to separate each month with white, which I think is pretty standard for temperature blankets. So now we can discuss what supplies I need. I obviously need yarn, a lot of different colors of yarn, and I've compiled a couple of images to think about what colors I want to use because I don't really want to go with the traditional temperature blanket colors, which are usually like blues and greens and violets for colder temperatures and reds, yellows, and oranges for warmer temperatures. For me, I am just not a huge fan of how those look. I think with this pattern, it could look nice, but it's just not my taste. And it also really doesn't make sense for miles. I guess I could do like reds and like hotter colors for higher distances, but I'd rather just kind of mix and match because I think the blanket means something to me, but I don't necessarily need people to see the blanket and know what those colors represent. I kind of would rather the colors and everything come together well than it be clear that it's a temperature blanket. I've used these two images. I really like the colors that Tony picked. Her blanket is beautiful. It's probably partially why I picked the blanket. but I love how vibrant her colors are. And I also put in a picture here from Boy Knits World because he uses kind of similar colors, but they're very muted. Kind of came up with these colors, which are to the right, and I think they're a good middle ground between Tony's and Boy Knits World. So these are kind of the tentative colors I want to go for, and the yarn I plan to use is Drops Baby Merino, partially because it's affordable, but also because they have a great color range. So I think that even if my local yarn store doesn't have these colors, I can still mix and match with what they have. So I think that's pretty much it planning wise. I know that was a lot of upfront discussion. I definitely have been thinking about this for a long time, so I over prepared before I actually started. So I think we're now ready to actually go to the yarn store, pick out my colors, and then when we get back we can discuss what colors will go with what miles, and then create our key, and then hopefully cast on. Hey guys, it is a couple days later and I have some things to show you. So I did buy the yarn. The yarn store didn't have all of the colors that I initially picked out, but I kind of anticipated that. And I did find some good alternatives. I'm really glad that I prepared in advance because there were so many colors and a lot of the variations between them were so subtle. It was a little overwhelming, but I was happy to have the Millinote to use as a frame of reference when picking my colors. I did end up only buying one skein per color because I'm not exactly sure what colors I'll need more of or less of, and the yarn store is not that far away and they usually do have a pretty good stock of drops, so I figured I'll just start with one and then pick up more as I need it. And I also picked up this very fun sparkly yarn from Krimka. I actually got this at another yarn shop called This Is Knit. I think this is going to be a great addition for those race days, which I talked about earlier. And I also picked up my hook because I obviously need that. I did make a little swatch with a different yarn that I have just to try this hook out. And let's see if I end up using it all year long. I will say I don't love this hook. I'm not sure if I will buy something a little bit nicer, but the cable is very rigid and plastic. It does swivel a little bit, but it also gets stuck. So I think this might bother me a little bit because it did bother me with the swatch. But there's a chance maybe it loosens up and moves a little bit more freely after I've worked a couple of rows. It also makes this noise that I don't really like, but that's very subtle, but maybe you guys can hear it with the microphone. It's not horrible, but just little things that if I'm going to be using this all year long, maybe I'll want to get something a little bit nicer. And this is from Xiaogu. It was actually the most affordable option at the yarn store, and it's a 5mm hook and it's bamboo. So let's see. It's not too bad, but yeah, these little things might bother me. The goal is to make sure that I finish this project. So kind of the fun part was picking the colors that would correlate with the different distances. And what I decided to do was to kind of somewhat alternate between hot and cold colors. There wasn't too much deliberating on the colors, honestly, just kind of mixed and matched. Tried to find a good balance between warm and cool so then everything comes together. But in general, I do think the colors are pretty low contrast, so lower stakes as far as things looking bad together. I think everything more or less flows pretty well. One thing I did pretty intentionally was picking a warm color for the marathon distance, partially because this gold color I bought is pretty close to a rose gold, so I picked this burgundy color and I think these two go together really nicely. And then something else I made sure to do was to write the yarn color number on the back so that when I have to go buy more, I know what color I need to buy. Something else Tony recommended was to have everything that you need to work on the project in one place. So basically, if you need a crochet hook, have a crochet hook that's designated for this project and keep it with the project, just so it's a little bit easier to pick up throughout the year and you don't have to kind of go around and collect all of your materials every time you want to work on it, which I thought was a really great idea. So I do have little scissors that I'm going to keep in here and also a highlighter and pen, because what I intend to do is, this is my 2025 running calendar, and I've printed out 2 copies. So one is kind of the real copy, and the other one I'm going to transfer my mileage over to. And then once I've crocheted the row for that day, I'll highlight it so I know that it's been incorporated into the blanket. So that's the plan. So one of these will stay also in this little crate with the yarn, and I think that's pretty much it. We're ready to cast on. I will check in with you guys probably, I don't know, after the first quarter maybe, so maybe end of March, early April. But for you, it will just be a couple seconds. For me, it will be quite a few weeks. Hey guys, welcome back. It is the beginning of April and I have an update on my temperature blanket. So this is my progress from the first 3 months. I am super happy with how it's coming out. I was a little bit nervous when I first started. The first month was looking a little bit muddled. It is this section right here. I think I had a fair amount of rest days in there and it was just all kind of getting very muddled together, but I think February and March is turning out way more fun and multicolored. And I did go ahead and add the tassels to the first quarter as well. Tony has a separate tutorial for these tassels on her YouTube channel, TL Yarn Crafts, and it is very easy to do, and it was a nice kind of way to finish things up. When I was working on this, there were a ton of tails and it was starting to get a bit knotted and hard to maneuver, so I was really happy to work up the tassels. It just makes it look really, I don't know, really nice and polished for the first quarter. In addition to adding the tassels, I also did block it. And this was probably pretty unnecessary, but I was curious to see how much the yarn would grow because I have heard this yarn does grow quite a bit. And it did grow, but obviously for a blanket, that's not a bad thing. Honestly, it's probably a good thing. So it was nice to see how it kind of relaxed and laid out. I really love the stitch pattern here. It being such a pretty stitch also makes me very motivated to work on it, which is great. I think the most I got behind on this project was maybe a week. And what I would do is I would usually take it to the knitting meetup that I attend. And this was a great project to work on in that 2 or 3 hour window. It does take me about 10 minutes to finish one row. But if I'm at a knitting meetup, I'm obviously chatting and not focused, so it does take me a little bit longer per row, but it's kind of perfect. So even if I don't work on this throughout the entire week, I can still take it to the knitting meetup and work on that on the weekend. So that has been a great project to take with me on the go. I might not be able to do that as this blanket grows, but for the first quarter, that worked really nicely. So some stats for you guys on the blanket itself for the first quarter. This represents 362 miles or 579 kilometers ran, and I kept track of all of that on my calendar right here. And then I did have to buy more yarn in the first quarter, a little bit of a humbling moment, but the yarn I ended up having to buy first was the rest day color. But when it came to buying that first ball, I was able to calculate how many rows or days I get out of one ball, which was nice to know. And that is 23 rows per ball. And if I do my math correctly, that means I'll probably need around 800 grams of yarn to finish this blanket. Something else I had to consider in this first quarter was what to do if I ran and I did some sort of cross training in the same day. And that would usually happen if I ran a shorter distance in the morning and then went to the gym in the evening. And what I ended up doing was I did use both colors. So I did 2 rows for that day. I would do the distance ran and then the color for cross training in a second row. And I did that partially because I don't think this blanket is going to get that much bigger as a result. I tend to go to the gym once or maybe twice a week, so I don't think it's going to be something that's really impacting the overall size that much. I did want to add the cross training into the blanket if I did it because I do have a hard time motivating myself to go to the gym. So I thought if I made sure to add in the blanket, it gave it some importance that I don't tend to associate with my strength training, but I know I need to do it. I know it will help me avoid injury and all that. I also really like the color of the strength training. It's this kind of pinky beige color, if you can see that there. and I really think it accents all of the blues really nicely, so I decided to incorporate it even if I did run. And just to give a quick synopsis of the actual running that occurred in the first quarter, I mostly did trail running in January. I did prioritize that a little bit more because I enjoy it, and I think in January it's hardest to get out the door. And I also thought it was a great way to strengthen my ankles and my knees in a way that wasn't just going to the gym, because I do mostly do road running. So that was really nice. And then February was a very low mileage month. I think I only ran 71 miles because I was in the States visiting my family, and then when I came back I got the flu, so I think that week was my lowest running week and I ran 1 mile. So that was a bit of a surprise, but all in all, February was a really nice month as well running wise. It was brighter and much muddier. So I definitely came home a couple times with mud all the way up to my knees. I also started a marathon training block for a marathon in June that I'm gonna do. So that was fun. It was nice to do a couple of speed workouts and, you know, sprint a little bit. That always feels really good. And then March was already pretty much full spring weather already. The weather here is just beautiful and so mild. I absolutely love it. Yeah, it just was an absolute pleasure running here. I think that is pretty much it. I am excited to get into quarter two. So quarter two is going to be much more eventful, and that video might be a bit more vlog-like because I have 3 races in the second quarter. And yeah, I'm excited to see this guy grow and to get racing. It's been a very peaceful winter. I would be curious to know if you guys are working on any blankets or temperature blankets, and if you are, how is it going? Are you keeping up with it? And if you're interested in making one, I'd be curious to know what data you would like to use in your version of the temperature blanket. Thanks so much for coming along, guys, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.